There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. From Mamamia, you're listening to No Filter, and I'm Mia Friedman. Nobody plans to be divorced before they turn 30. I know this because I was. And so is my guest today, Charlotte Ree. As her relationship hit serious turbulence, fueled by wild disputes about money and sexual incompatibility, Charlotte wrote about how food was the thing that bound her and her husband. I'm not sure how our shared love of food, our shared love of cooking, our shared love became a source of resentment, of control, she wrote. But I know that I'm lonely in my marriage, that while I eat, I never feel fulfilled. 48 hours later, she left her husband. And 24 hours after that, Sydney entered its first lockdown. Charlotte is a book publishing executive, but she is also an author herself. She has a cookbook called Just Desserts, which is my go-to anytime that I need to bake something to quiet my mind or fill my stomach. But this new book she's written is also a memoir. It's got recipes, but it is about love, finding it and then realising it's curdled into something toxic. It's about the full range of dating app experiences, from a threesome to a stalker, and the role that food played through all of it. Charlotte insists that this is not a story of revenge or regret. It's a story about losing love but finding herself. And here's how it happened. Charlotte, your 24th birthday, you went out to dinner. It was an interesting evening. You had cheeseburger spring rolls.
Yes.
Which I did not know were a thing.
Yeah.
And you had an unexpected conversation with your boyfriend. How long had you been together?
We'd been together for 5 years.
Since you were 19?
Yeah, since I was 19.
And what were you expecting from that night? You were at a fancy restaurant.
I mean, I really sort of amplify birthdays and Christmas, and, you know, those sorts of occasions are huge for me, and especially other people's birthdays. I just love them. So for me, it was just this exciting, you know, it's my birthday and we're going to Miss G's, and we hadn't eaten there before, and I was so excited just to try new food as well.
Well, you certainly did that. But what was the unexpected turn that the conversation took that night?
My boyfriend told me that he wanted to sleep with other people and open up our relationship.
Not the birthday gift you were expecting.
Yeah, happy bloody birthday, right?
How did you react?
I think at first I was in disbelief, but I also surprised myself in my immediate repulsion to the idea. I am the biggest people pleaser in the entire world. And so, you know, I'm sure that there was a part of me that was like, well, maybe you can do this, and maybe, you know, but I just immediately knew that that was something I could not and would not do.
Because I was going to say, I don't know why you were surprised, because, you know, your partner unexpectedly out of the blue saying, I want to have sex with other people would not be something that most people would be thrilled to hear or even open to hearing.
No. And I think it did completely blindside me. And, you know, I don't know if it was immediately after taking the bite of the cheeseburger spring roll, but it felt like it. And I have just such an absolute disgust towards any cheeseburgers now. It like takes me back to that moment, just smelling them. Yeah.
How did the rest of the night go?
It was tough. I mean, there's a photo of us from that night. I'm in like this orange Gorman shift dress, and I just look at it and I just am looking at someone who is not there and not present and not in their body. And I think that would be the best way to describe what kind of followed, is that I was floating.
Did you straight away say no, or why, or like what context did you have for that?
In my head, I did. I didn't immediately say that to him. And I do think, you know, back to that people pleasing, I do think I kind of did engage the conversation. But kind of like you do when traumatic things happen. I'm someone who fixates on the food in that moment. Like that's my memory sort of, that's what is that
your
sort
sense
of
memory.
Origin. Exactly. And so I can't remember vividly that immediate aftermath, but I just remember feeling as though I was floating.
Did he give reasons for why he wanted to open your relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was 24. I think I'd recently just become a manager at work. I was traveling constantly.
You worked in book publishing.
Yeah, and as a publicity manager at the time. And I was with high-profile authors. Sometimes I'd be traveling for 3 months at a time. I'd come home just to wash my underwear and then stay for a night and then jump back on a plane. I wasn't the most present person, definitely in text and calls and gushing with love because I was very in love. But
3 months is quite a long time to not have sex.
That's exactly what I was about to say. But
saying?
Sexually, I definitely, and that was an issue throughout our relationship, including when we got married, that there were those ebbs and flows of desire and of just fluctuating libido.
So how did the night end?
Pretty badly, like just, on opposite sides of the bed. And we broke up shortly thereafter, which was really traumatic and really harrowing for me, like a first love. I'm the type of person that loves love and really gives my all to pretty much anything that I do. And so that was the same in that relationship. And so to not have it felt as though I was being starved of oxygen.
So the reason you broke up was because you said, no, I'm not prepared to have an open relationship.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, I'm not prepared to keep it closed. So,
and a big part of it was we got together when we were 19. Neither of us had had a serious relationship before. All of our friends were single and nobody, if they were dating, they weren't in serious relationships. And so we were like the mum and dad of the group. And I definitely feel that he felt like he was missing out on something, whether he knew what that was or didn't. It was that feeling of wanting something, longing for something that he didn't know. And so
it's like he wanted to root around.
Exactly.
More sex with more people.
In all honesty, I'd done that from when I moved to Sydney when I was 17. I had my fun and it's not that fun. One night stands fucking suck.
Yeah.
So there was no real desire for me to go out and seek what he felt he needed to seek.
You mentioned getting married. Spoiler alert. How did you get from breaking up to getting married?
So I think he went sort of shortly after we broke up, he quit his job and he went overseas with his best mate. And I do think it was this Don Juan kind of esque idea of going to Europe and having this glorious time. And I don't think that necessarily occurred for him. And he came back and we were in touch while he was away. And I remember I got my wisdom teeth out and it was kind of like the last straw, high on endone, and he was contacting me and then my gums got infected and I just had awful cloves stuffed into them and that horrendous taste. And I just remember standing outside the dentist and just saying to him, I'm not doing this anymore. You can go and do what you want. I'm not going to be here for you. And
because what did he want you to do? He just wanted
I think
to have
he wanted
both.
his cake and to eat it too. I think he absolutely loved me. And he absolutely wanted the relationship, but he wanted to have that experience. And here I was not in a relationship with him, but allowing him to do that. And I was waiting, I guess, for him. I loved him.
So he wanted still the emotional support and he wanted your friendship and he wanted to be able to drop back into your life when it suited him.
Yeah, and he did know he was being unreasonable in that. He is someone who is very self-aware in that way. And I guess it kind of took me to say, I'm done, for him to realise, I guess, that he wasn't really getting what he wanted and that he could have that relationship. And so we got back together and sort of just fell back into place really beautifully. And we had a really beautiful few years together.
How long after you got back together did you decide to propose?
I did it, I think, on my 26th birthday or 27th birthday. We're going to have to fact check with the book. So it was a couple
Playing with fire, on the birthday.
I know, far out. I didn't realise that shit. And we were in the Hunter Valley and we had this sort of Airbnb and it had a chalkboard wall and we were playing hangman all weekend. And I guess when you've been together for as long as we had, even with the little blip of a break, which was about 3 months really, you get asked, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have children? And I think it was something he was never compelled to do or driven by. But I was just of this mindset that I had this plan for myself. I'd be in a high profile position in my early 20s and I did. And I would be in a serious relationship in my early 20s and I was. And I wanted to have kids by the time I was 30 and be married. And so I hangmaned him, will you marry me? And he looked at it and he guessed it straight away, but he said it aloud. So I was like, well, yeah, I will.
That is the best proposal story I've ever heard.
But I do think there was some, and this is the power of hindsight, but some reluctance for both of us. Like, we didn't call anyone, we didn't post on social media, we just sort of kept it to ourselves for sometimes months afterwards.
Did you feel like you tricked him into it?
I felt like I was cheated. I felt like I was cheated of that little girl's dream of being proposed
But then
to.
why did you do it? Why did you do the hangman thing? Like, did you think, I'm going to propose to him?
It was like I was in my own pressure cooker of time and I wanted to let my steam out. It was like I was forcing his hand because if he said no, great, like that was my answer and then I would know that. And that's not to say I didn't love him. I loved him so much. But did we enter that for the right reasons and did we marry in the best, possible way for each of us? Maybe not. But can I sit here and say I gave my relationship everything and I absolutely do not have any regrets in marrying him.
He had 2 conditions for you guys getting married.
Yeah.
What were they?
They were that I would get my driver's license and that we would begin to share bank accounts.
What was his reasoning for those 2 conditions?
I think the biggest one is that the license was frustrating for him. I was 27 and didn't know how to drive.
What was that about? I don't understand people who don't get their license. Like, it's mystifying to me.
Yeah. In all honesty, I think, and I can make excuses, but I do think when you're in your teens and you get it, you have this sort of fearlessness and this sort of, risky behaviour in a way. And it was like I was a risk assessor and I got really anxious. And then I could sit here and joke and say, well, you can't be good at everything. It was my one thing. But in all honesty, I think it was just a fear. It was a fear of being in control of something and maybe in control of my own independence. I think maybe it was like I was restricting myself. I don't know.
Have you got it now?
I just got it in January.
How old are you now?
32.
That's a big deal because I imagine the longer, I got it the second I could, but the longer you put it off, the more of a big deal it is.
It's extraordinary.
I've got friends like that.
I did an 800-kilometre road trip in my first week of getting it. Like, it was just so freeing and so liberating.
Yeah. Do you wish you'd got earlier?
Yes and no. Like, I think in some ways it was also, to be completely honest, a big stubbornness that I didn't have it with him. It was like such a big thing with him and that was my one bit of control.
Tell me about the bank accounts.
And as for the money, I, was in a high-profile position from a young age. I earned, more than him. I think he had this narrative that I was reckless with money and that he was much better with it. And
Is that true?
I think I come from a mindset like I don't want to deprive myself. I work really, really, really hard. And if I want to have that bottle of champagne, I'm going to have that bottle of champagne. And
so you weren't in debt or anything?
No.
Because the idea of reckless, his version of reckless could be that you spend it on a bottle of champagne or a beautiful meal, whereas your version of reckless might be that he bought a pair of shoes or went on a boys' weekend. So, it's very subjective, isn't it?
And I guess what it comes down to is 2 things. We had very different goals, and his goal was that, he would retire by the time he was 40 and he would have a property portfolio, and his parents had a property portfolio, and that was kind of what drove him.
Did he earn anything? What did he do?
He initially worked sort of in marketing for an ice cream company and then I think got burnt out, and so he was an Uber driver. And he absolutely earned money, but it was different and he spent it.
So you were the breadwinner?
Yes, yeah.
I want to talk to you more about that, but I first want to ask you about your wedding cakes.
Yes.
How many did you have, Charlotte?
9.
I'm in love with this story. Can you explain why you decided to have 9 wedding cakes?
I mean, when I finally told my mum that I was getting divorced, she said something to me like, you just wanted the party, didn't you?
You just wanted the cakes.
And I was all about user experience for my wedding day. And people still come up and say, best wedding I've ever been to. And that for me involved the food, mostly because I've been to actually very few weddings, but I've been to so many events where you are starved or you are served just terrible food.
And dessert's so often an afterthought, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so we had a gelato cart from Gelato Messina and they had like 280 scoops of like our favourite flavours. And then I went to Flower and Stone and my friend Nadine and I got 9.
An amazing, iconic bakery in Sydney.
Yes, and I got 9 cakes and they were, themed things like a flourless chocolate cake, a lemon dream, which is lemon curd, cream, a sponge, and pavlova kind of in different tiers. I got everything that you could possibly imagine, and it was like Narnia. And of course people had alcohol by then, but honestly, I am so proud to say there was not a crumb of cake left, and there was one tub of gelato left, which I sat on the floor eating at 3 a.m. in my Spanx with my mates around me after everyone had left.
There's a fantastic photo of, you know, all the people, like
9
people
seen that.
I have.
Yes.
I Googled Charlotte Ree's wedding. People can find it if they're looking, and it's all of you, or you and your friends with all the cakes. How were the cakes served?
They were just cut up, and my poor...
Did you have to cut all of them?
My beautiful friend Ali, I think she'll never forgive me for me sort of asking her to just transport the cakes from cake boxes to cake stands, and I think it was the most terrifying 30 minutes of her life doing that. But I think it was just at that point where I just was like, have at it. Have fun. Eat it. Eat the cake.
After the cake was digested and everyone's blood sugar recovered, you begun the business of being married, and quite a business it was. I've heard you say that Scott Pape ruined your life for a few years, though.
If I ever saw that man.
The barefoot investor who wrote the iconic book about money management.
Yeah.
Why did he make your marriage so impossible?
Somebody, and I haven't really spoken to them since, gifted us a copy on our wedding day. And my husband sort of took that like a Bible, like the gospel according to Scott Pape.
A lot of people do.
Yeah, and I, in all honesty, I still haven't read it. I refuse to. But, you know, it was his advice is that you have an ING bank account, orange telltale card. You divide that bank account into what he calls buckets. And so there are things, I think I've, again, blocked them out of my memory, but like every day you could have food, you could have a bank account for things that bring you joy. So our bank account was divided quite militantly.
And you had to put you combined bank accounts.
Yeah.
Did anyone advise you against that? Did you?
My mum, staunchly. She was so adamant about not doing it, and she had never done it. Her and my stepfather, who I call Pa, they've been together for 30 years. They've never shared bank accounts, and she was so adamant against it. And I think I just went in blindly, willingly, hopefully, and I didn't really understand the impact of it probably until I left and I got sent a podcast about financial abuse.
What were some of the restrictions that were placed on you as far as money goes?
So I'll be clear in two things. I had absolute access to the money. I could have absolutely removed it, touched it, done anything. I didn't.
So it wasn't withheld from you?
It was not withheld. I had complete access. And the second thing I'll say is that all sort of communal expenses were covered. So rent, food, electricity, phone
from your
bills,
pooled income, which was mostly yours.
Yes. And then from that, we each got paid $100 a week. And that $100 was for if, you know, it was late at night and I wanted to get an Uber home from work, if I wanted to go out for dinner with friends, if I wanted to buy a dress, if I wanted to, you know, grab a coffee, treat myself.
$100 a week.
$100.
When that limit was set, was it negotiated between you? Did you push back and say, hang on a second, I'm going to need more than that?
We very rarely argued, and then we just would nonstop argue about money. It was awful. It was an awful, you know, for both of us, because he was not malicious. He just was so driven to purchase a house. That's what he wanted. And anything that kind of came between that, he couldn't understand why anything would come between that. Mm-hmm. And I remember two major sort of incidences which really got under my skin and just made me think about, what are you doing? And one was I needed new bras. And I have big breasts on a tiny body, and you can't just walk into Kmart and grab something off the rack. And so bras for me can cost like $90, $150. And
the bigger the boob, the more I've discovered this as my boobs have grown. The bigger the boob, the more expensive the bra.
And I remember saying to him, I don't think that should come from my $100. And he said, no, it has to. Has to come from the 100. And then the second.
And if you spent your 100 in a week, there was no more until the next week.
Yeah. And then the second biggest was that I wanted to get a psychologist. And
I'm not surprised.
The battle to justify that money. Because again, psychology therapy, it's so expensive, even with the mental health care plan.
And that also had to come out of your $100.
Yeah, but that just simply couldn't.
No.
And so to fight for that.
So you couldn't see a psychologist because even $100 a week would
No,
never
and that's
cover
where
it.
I think it was incredibly difficult because it was my first time advocating for myself in that way and fighting for myself in that way. And then when I realised that I really needed someone and I needed that person to go from 1 month to twice a month, I started to hide money. And I don't like being duplicitous. I don't like being deceitful, but I didn't have anyone to talk to. And
did you not confide in, you didn't want to tell your mum, you didn't want to tell girlfriends?
I just couldn't. I had such shame, but I feel such sadness for her. I feel for me, like that version of me, because, you know, my friends would be really weirded out that I just wouldn't have a bottle of wine, or I'd want them to come over all the time.
Would they ever say why and you'd say, I've got no money? Like, what would you say?
No.
You hid it.
I definitely hid it. And I think after sort of multiple sessions with the woman I've come to call the Oracle, my psychologist, I started to sort of slowly reveal, and then I guess based on people's reactions, they were astonished. And it took me a long time to sort of tell a lot of people, and I think still a lot of people have no idea and they're reading it for the first time in the book.
I remember talking to a man once who told me a similar story about how he managed his money with his wife. And he was saying how they have a spreadsheet and everything she spends, she has to log in the spreadsheet. Maybe this is also Barefoot Investor, I'm not sure. Yeah. And he was sitting with a group of women and we were all aghast and we said, what are you talking about? Like every coffee, everything. Yeah. And he said, he was shocked that we were shocked. And he said, she can spend whatever she wants. She's just got to log it in the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And that idea of your husband or ex-husband no doubt justified it to himself, as did you.
Yeah.
You've got access. Like you could take the money if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And from the outside, it's like, well, but why didn't you?
Yeah. I am financially illiterate. I'm very good at making money. Do I put that emphasis on that money like it is the be all and end all? No, because I know that I can always just work really hard and I can earn more if I need to and do what I need to. He was so set on that. And so the spreadsheeting, I had completely forgotten about the spreadsheeting. It did exist, and it didn't exist in that sort of way of itemizing things, but it did exist in that anything that was taken out of the account, like the bank statement, became a spreadsheet in some ways. Like every transaction had to be identified. And, you know, I remember we went out on Valentine's Day and we argued over, you know, part of my sort of anxiety around that time was all around sort of being very indecisive, because that was the biggest decision, was whether to stay or go. Yeah. And I couldn't decide what to eat. We'd just seen a movie. And he was so frustrated with me that I wouldn't just pick where I wanted to be and to eat. And he said, "You're just so difficult." And then we finally did eat somewhere, and then he goes, "Right, that's $47.50 each. You've got to put it in the account." Like there was never any romance around going out for dinner.
No.
And that, again, it was, I think, for both of us, it was just a version of control for both of us. I was sort of sticking my feet in the dirt and really burrowing down and digging my feet in, wanting to sort of have control over my money, and he wanted to sort of have control over, I guess, what he would describe as our future. But you didn't. You had
no control, really.
No.
And it's interesting what you said at the very start about this narrative that he constructed that you then bought into, that you're reckless with money and he's responsible with money. How much of it do you think was about you wanting to give him that control so he didn't feel emasculated that you earned more?
Not a bit. I know that sounds so ridiculous, but my mum was the breadwinner in our family. My pa was the one that stayed at home. My pa was the one that made our lunches and picked us up and did our washing and got stains out of shirts. Like, I never, ever thought about that.
But did he?
I don't know. And maybe, you know, I think a big thing, which I then found when I began to date, was that I became really attracted to people that had ambition and drive and were successful. I mean, that's not necessarily the best thing, because sometimes that means that those people can't prioritize a relationship. But I did think that he was a bit lost in what he wanted to do. And I had a very clear idea of where I wanted to be. I had no idea about myself and who I was, but I knew what I was capable of, and I knew I was really good at my job, and I knew I became really good at baking and that I had a baking book. You know, there was options for me, and I think he just felt a bit lost.
When was the moment you decided to end the marriage?
It came after I had started sort of a baking side hustle to sort of earn more money, start hiding money, which is not something I'm proud of, but something that was necessary at the time.
I'm proud of it for you.
Thank you. And I had just done a job for a really big ice cream company, and they had done this sort of launch on one of those really obnoxious like super yachts. And we were like kids on a, you know, in a candy store. We'd never done anything like that. And we were on this yacht, and we, you know, the sun was setting and we were going past the harbour bridge, and I'd just gotten a bonus at work. And I'd sort of avoided telling him I got work paid into an individual bank account, not my joint bank account, which I think was me kind of foreshadowing what I already knew. And he sort of tapped me on the back because I had really wanted to go to Paris. I was coming up for long service leave. I wanted to do a sabbatical. And he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you know, I'd really love you to have Paris, don't you? But all of that money just has to go into our savings. And I just looked at him in that moment and I just knew. And that was, you know, people talk about moments that sort of changed them. And that was the moment that I knew I was going to leave my marriage.
After the break, Charlotte speaks about throwing herself into the world of dating apps and how a threesome and some vodka pasta happened. How old are you when you ended your marriage?
29.
So divorced before 30?
Yeah.
Not in the brochure?
No, and even more not in the brochure was a pandemic. I left my marriage and moved into a new house. I moved into a 3-story terrace on my own, but I just was obsessed with the pastel pink kitchen, and the next day we went into lockdown.
What happened then?
Absolute rock bottom. I think it was that I genuinely, on partly, you know, the boat moment, but the other moment was looking in the mirror one day and genuinely not knowing who I was and what I wanted and what I liked. So much revolved around, what my partner liked and what food we ate and what things we did.
And what you were allowed to do.
Yeah, and I just had absolutely no idea. And so here I was flailing, and I still remember being in this beautiful house, but it was empty and the removalist truck hadn't arrived, and I still was indecisive. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing, and I didn't really have anyone that I talked to at the time in detail. And I still remember thinking you can just call him and it wasn't so bad and you can go back and you'll figure it out and put everything back how it was and just suck it up. You were happy, and I was. Then the beep, beep, beep of the truck backing into the street came into sort of my reality, and I knew that, you know, I had my mum in my ear kind of saying, the sort of seeds you sow now will be what you grow. What do you want? And I knew I had to do it. I knew I had to leave. You
threw yourself into cooking for your neighbours who you hadn't met yet in that first lockdown.
Yeah. I think I just realised because I couldn't, you know, work. I was travelling a lot for work. I couldn't travel. I couldn't go into the office. I couldn't host friends. And I just realised that if I stayed alone and I didn't do that, I would go into quite a dark place. And my whole time in living in Sydney, I'd avoided my neighbours. You know, I think that was like, you know, having house parties. You don't want to talk to them, avoid them. And I just baked so many muffins, banana muffins, and I had copies of my first book, and I went to each of them with a cake box in my book, and I said, please, I'm legitimate. I'm not going to poison you. I just really need to cook to get through this, so please let me cook for you. And it eventuated that, you know, every Saturday I'd pick up baking trays from each of them. I'd make each person a lasagna, you know, with 24-hour ragu and handmade lasagna sheets. It was so therapeutic for me cooking, and also that feeling like I was helping someone. You know, the woman next door was doing, you know, her PhD and lived alone. Next door to her was a woman that became one of my very good friends, a single mum who had just lost her job. Across the road were critical workers. I felt like I had purpose.
That's one of the most beautiful pandemic lockdown stories I've heard. It just, I was so sad that I didn't live near you.
I know. And I think they were so sad when I moved because they just didn't have this feeder.
I'm surprised they didn't all contribute to your rent.
I became such a feeder.
You were thrown into the world of the apps, the dating apps, at age 30.
Yes.
Tell me about the rower.
Oh, God. Holly wrote a brilliant article about this, about the ways in which you become a chameleon when you're dating people. And I think I threw myself into dating like I've thrown myself into so many things at life with absolute dogged determination. Like I took it as a job. I was like, this is your career now.
What were you looking for?
Oh, I wanted...
Another husband?
I mean,
another relationship.
I love. But, you know, my husband got into a serious relationship 2 months after we separated and they're still together. Absolutely want them to be happy and wonderful. But that was deeply cutting and deeply made me go, all right, you're inadequate. That's what you need. You'll feel better when you get that. Yeah. So I went into that with such purpose. And so the rower was this lovely man, but he was someone who I was so mismatched to, but I did everything for. And so, of course, that was cooking. You know, I learned how to cook a steak perfectly, eternally grateful to him for that. But I hiked. I don't hike. Like I had this really traumatic outward bound experience when I was 16 with my period in the bush in Kyogle. Gross. Don't want to ever do that again. Yeah. Don't want to be near leeches again. He was pulling ticks out of my back.
Not a nature girl.
But here I was thinking, yes,
I could be this.
This is me. And my friends thought this was the greatest real life comedy of all time. They were just enjoying seeing me fit into whatever sort of shape. I was shape shifting.
Who were some of the other shapes you shifted into?
Oh my goodness. I was, you know, with a doctor for a little while. He didn't make the book, but I was 6 weeks off work. I was a doctor's wife for those 6 weeks. I had breakfast, a little goodie bag for him to take to work, risotto when he came home. You know, I was an intermittent accommodation for a guy I called Camo Pants whenever he just came into Sydney. And these men would not bring wine or food or certainly cook for me, but my goodness, did I cook my heart out for them. And it was because I felt as though by feeding them and them loving my food, they were loving me. And it was so mismatched. I was projecting so much onto that. And eventually I think I just realised I needed to feed myself. But that took a really long time to realise, and a lot of dodgy dates and crappy men in between. And it's not that, you know, they were very clear about what they wanted. I mean, some took a little while to articulate it. It's that I went into absolute imaginary mode, you know, putting my name and their last name together, you know, thinking about all the different ways, you know, that I'd meet their family and the things I'd cook for their family and how I could be liked by them. But it was just that I had just a deep distaste for myself.
Tell me about the threesome.
I think part of that journey for me was trying to just see what stuck, throwing everything up in the air. And I guess after the initial breakup with my husband, when he wanted to sleep with other people, I was trying to put that hat on. I was trying to understand it.
I can be sexually free.
Yeah. And I was naive. You know, I thought we were just meeting for a drink. But of course.
Where did you meet them?
We met at a rum bar in the city in Sydney. And, you know, I remember walking into it and there were Chesterfield couches and I was thinking, oh, my grandmother had one of those. You know, I was just so naive, and they had clearly done this a lot before with different people. Yeah. And so, you know, I remember she went to the bathroom and I thought, oh God, I hope she doesn't come back. Like, I just wish it was he and I. And then he went to the bathroom and I thought, oh, this is part of their shtick. They're sussing me out. So I played along and I went to the bathroom.
So they could decide whether you were right for them.
Yeah. And I guess just part of me was just open. I kept thinking about that whole process. This might be the one time you are completely responsibility free. You owe nothing to anyone. You don't have children. You can do what you want and have, you know, only yourself to blame or to cheer or to celebrate. And so I invited them back to my house where I had made vodka pasta for myself if I drunkenly returned home. And we just...
You were so organised.
And we ate vodka pasta and I remember we were sitting on the couch together and, you know, she said that he and I should kiss. And so we did. And I felt her breath on my cheek in the middle, and we went upstairs, and it was, you know, I have never watched porn. In all honesty, I just haven't. And it felt like I was watching porn by watching them have fun together by, they had rules, no penetrative sex.
With the third party.
With the third party. So they could, but I couldn't. And it was transformative for me in a multitude of ways. I think it was amazing for me to perform oral sex on a woman because I was deeply uncomfortable with anyone, even my husband initially, performing oral sex on me. And to do that and to realize it's really beautiful and women are beautiful, that was phenomenal for me and really transformative in my view of my own body and my understanding and acceptance of myself. And I'm so grateful for that. But there was a shift in a moment when he and I were kissing and something shifted for her and she left quite abruptly. And I remember just thinking afterwards that you can't ever really know what the introduction of a third will do for you or anyone. And I couldn't know what that would do for me. But I did know that I didn't want that in a relationship. I don't want to see my partner sleep with someone else.
So as the third party in a threesome, you've got the least risk.
Absolutely.
You've got the lowest stakes.
Absolutely. I mean, and there is a stake that there's two people who you don't know. And that was my decision for not going back to their house and them coming to mine. And I had a safety blanket with my neighbour who I'd text with, photos and names and numbers. But yeah, I think you can't ever know what someone will, and polyamory and all those sorts of things, it works for some people, but I just know it certainly would not work for me.
You also had a really disturbing experience with a guy you called the Fright, who you met for what started out as a great date.
A great date, a really great date. It was around the end of the year, around December. And so I was really sort of beginning to value myself and love myself and realising.
Imagine that.
I know. I didn't have to sleep with every person.
Yeah.
And I actually could just end a date after 2 hours and then say I'd love to see them again. And so I made an excuse that I had a dinner with a friend to go to, but I'd like to see him again. And it ended, fine, amicably. But when I was walking away, I received a text from him and it said that he loved me. And I just remembered immediately becoming quite panicked and I jumped in a taxi. I was about 5 minutes from home. It was my local, which was even more terrifying. And I said to the taxi driver, no, it's not a long way, but I explained kind of what was happening. And I guess what resulted then was harassment, as, a plethora of text messages.
What did they say?
That, he wanted to be with me, that he thought that I was different and I wasn't. I was just like everyone else. And ultimately the most terrifying thing, and I guess I want to preface this by saying I have grown up with mental illness in my life with both my parents, and I could tell that this was someone who was not well. So for people listening going, why didn't you just block his number? I couldn't do that. And so...
Well, you could, but you felt that you shouldn't.
Yes. Precisely.
You had
absolutely
compassion because you had been through
and so he was
illness.
Threatening suicide. He was saying that he was going to kill himself and that it was because of me. And I was, sending him the numbers for Lifeline, telling him to contact his friends.
How long did this go on for?
Days. Days. And I remember there was this moment where, he'd finally sobered up and he sort of messaged and I said, I can't do this. I need to look after myself. I've just come out of a very, tumultuous time. And he said, thank you, Charlotte, I understand. And I was kind of walking thinking, oh, wow, that's great, it's over. I just got AirPods for the first time and I didn't realise that Siri read out text to you. And it said, message from the Fright, eat shit. And I just remember maniacally giggling and this woman sort of walking towards me on the street and she crossed the street because I must have just bubbled over out of myself.
At one point you got a text from his sister.
Yes. And it said that she didn't know how well I knew him, but that she was sorry to tell me that he had committed suicide the night before. And I remembered just reading that and it was like 7 a.m. I woke up to it. And then I thought, oh my God, it's you. It's him. And
pretending to be his sister.
And so at that point in time, I finally reached out to a friend and realised that the only sort of way that I could, and this is the problem with dating apps. I couldn't report him because I blocked him on the app that I met him on, so therefore I didn't have photographs of him. I knew his name and, I did find his mum and sister on Facebook and I did send the sister a screenshot of the message and I was saying, I don't know him and I'm really sorry for your loss. But then a friend came over, the friend that I'd told, and we rang his number, and within 2 rings he answered. And so I immediately unsent the message to his sister because I didn't want that to escalate things. But the thing that sort of did stop it was that I got my male friend, who is the least intimidating human being in the world if you ever met him, to send a message and say, "Hi, I'm a man and I'm telling you you've got to stop contacting her or we'll go to the police." And that is what stopped him. And about a month afterwards, and, you know, I hadn't been eating, I hadn't been sleeping, I was hypervigilant, I was terrified because I'd met him near my house. And about a month afterwards, he wrote a message apologising and recognising his behaviour. It is really scary that there are instances like that on the apps, and I think if I had been perhaps a more vulnerable or a different type of person, having an "I love you" message could have been extraordinary.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the scary thing about apps and dating, and you don't know who you're going to encounter. But that was a very terrifying interaction.
The last person in your book that you describe dating is a guy called the Ginger. And you have a beautiful first date, but by this time, you know, your work with your psychologist has made you see that you've been so busy cooking for other people that you haven't learnt to cook for yourself.
Yeah.
And in another lockdown, you turned that nurturing inwards and learned to take care of yourself with food in the way that you'd always taken care of other people. And with the Ginger, you kind of paced yourself and he cooked for you as much as you cooked for him. How did that turn out?
It was the most extraordinary discovery of my life. I think discovering myself and in turn discovering someone else and falling in love with 2 people at the same time was magic.
It's a good kind of threesome.
Oh my God.
With only 2 people in it.
My only kind of threesome now. It was the most magical year of my life. And I think what happens when you have done an immense amount of work, which I have done and am continuing to do, I think that's a big thing for me. I don't ever think I'm not a work in progress. I'm going to continue to see my therapist sometimes once a week, which I am at the moment. But throughout my life, I'm going to keep learning about myself, is that people then realize different aspects of themselves that they haven't seen or understood. I finally saw myself for the first time. I was finally seen by someone for the first time. I was finally seeing someone for the first time, but he couldn't see himself. And so he came and just very out of the blue, he just said that he couldn't see a future. And it was, I honestly believe, more devastating than my marriage breakdown. It was more devastating than anything I'd ever experienced because I had lived my life with him in my head. I had seen with such clarity and not even just hope. Like, it was just, for me, it felt really preordained that he and I met. And so to sort of have that sort of rug pulled out from underneath me, and also, in all honesty, it being the first time that I've really worked for something and really put in every effort and energy and, you know, gone to the depths of me and questioned why I felt like something and then articulated that to him, and it didn't work out. So a feeling of like a real failure really rocked me to my core.
Jessie Stevens writes in her book about heartbreak that there's a very good reason that your heart breaks, because it's like someone seeing all parts of you, seeing you naked, knowing who you really are, and then going, nah. Nah. And it's a different kind of heartbreak that you had in your marriage, which was the heartbreak of not being seen. But you were in control of ending that, and it was a heartbreak of this person I love doesn't see me and I can't stay here not being seen, but then finding someone being seen and them going, nah.
Yeah, and even, you know what? It wasn't even, this is where it gets to the worst part. It wasn't even a nah. It was, I love you so much, but I need to figure myself out right now.
Well, that's a better thing, because then you can go, it's not me, it's him.
Yeah.
It's better than, I just don't love you.
I know, it's just not that into
It's just
you.
not enough.
But it just, you know, it was, I suppose if you had have asked me 6 months ago where I saw myself, it would be, you know, madly in love and living with my partner and about to have this exciting book come out.
Yeah.
And I guess now it's like madly in love, living alone and have this book come out. And it's just, you know, it's...
So you guys are back together?
We are, I would say, my heart is hopeful. And it is very full with him, but that, you know, you can't predict what's going to happen in life. You know, can be in your highest of highs and the next moment there's a huge low around the corner. And I guess life is full of imperfection. It's messy. It's chaotic. It's gloriously joyful. It's all of these things, and the best love stories are those things. And is he the love of my life? Absolutely. And what that ends up being, I don't know. But I also know that I have myself and I'm holding myself. And if I can get through, you know, a divorce in lockdown and I can get through this last breakup, you know, on my own, I know I can do anything.
Charlotte turned up for this interview with a box of double choc brownies that she made because one choc brownie is not enough. They need to be double. And she also brought a chocolate olive oil cake, and recipes for both are actually in this book. The book is called Heartbreak. It is like if a memoir had a baby with a cookbook, and it's out this month. You can order it right now via the link in our show notes. I just loved that interview. I said to Charlotte afterwards that interviews are like a dance, and sometimes the person you're trying to dance with is like drunk and keeps elbowing you in the face on the dance floor. And other times it's just like this perfectly beautiful piece of choreography. And that's what it felt like with her. She's so beautifully able to express how she feels and tell a great story. And I highly recommend her recipes and also the book. The producer of No Filter is Emmeline Peterson, and our executive producer is Eliza Ratliff, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Friedman, and thanks for having me in your ears again.